and welcome to Veterans of the Valley. I'm Tom Turbeville. Join the Navy and see the world. And indeed, Lieutenant Commander Garland Bayliss of College Station saw most of it in his 2-year service aboard Auxiliary Personnel 149, a troop transport ship during World War II. It was a vessel built only as a transport and ferried up to 3,000 from one town or island to another. It took some back from war, from home, and some from home into, damn it. You know, I messed that up when I was rehearsing it. I wrote it right, I just can't say it. Sorry about that. That happens about 3 times a year.
That's
so
all right.
Congratulations, you were here for
I
it.
messed you up.
No, you didn't. No, I messed my. Let me look at it and see. I know I wrote it right. It's just awkward for me to see. I wrote it the way I meant to read it. It's just that my eyes aren't. It was a vessel built only as a transport and ferried up to 3,000 from one town or island to another. It took some back home from war and some from home into war. That's exactly what I want. It took some. Okay, I'm going to read every word.
Got it tangled a little bit there.
Okay, sorry about that. They need stuff for their Christmas party tape. That's why I did that.
Okay.
Hello and welcome to Veterans of the Valley. I'm Tom Turbeville. Join the Navy and see the world. And indeed, Lieutenant Commander Garland Bayliss of College Station saw most of it in his 2-year service aboard Auxiliary Personnel 149, a troop transport ship during World War II. It was a vessel built only as a transport and ferried up to 3,000 from one town or island to another. It took some back home from war and some from home into war. It was on the water, both in the Pacific and Atlantic, for 2 years, and he traveled some 125,000 nautical miles. In all, Garland Bayliss spent 30 years in the Navy and the reserves, and then later spent 34 years as a professor of history at Texas A&M. Please welcome Garland Bayliss to Veterans of the Valley. Garland, it's an honor to know you. I've known you for some time, and to have you here on Veterans of the Valley finally. Let's talk a little bit about growing up. You grew up in McGee, Arkansas.
That is correct.
Southeast part of the state. Talk about growing up in McGee.
Well, McGee was a small country town, about 3,000, 18 miles Mississippi River, 40 miles north of Louisiana. It's a railroad town, essentially. Grew up in a railroad family, also cotton and corn. Ruled the country folks all came to town on Saturday. I won't go into what is called Furnish Day. You probably never heard of it. That's when the landowners furnish their tenants with money to make the ensuing crop.
Right.
Got out of high school there, started college in Monticello, Arkansas, then Arkansas A&M, now the University of Arkansas at Monticello.
Right.
Very small school. Virtually no men left. The 206 Coastal Artillery Battery had been activated and sent to Alaska. That left a ratio of about 4 women to every boy, which is pretty good.
It wasn't a bad deal.
Wasn't a bad deal.
I want to go back to your family. Your family was in the railroad business. Your
My
dad
father
was a conductor.
That's right, and 2 brothers were conductors.
And 2 brothers worked.
And they were thus exempt from the draft.
Right.
My 2 other brothers both drafted. One spent a little over 4 years overseas, the other 3.5 years before they got home.
Right.
They were stationed. One went from North Africa, Sicily, to Italy, into France and into Germany before the war was over.
Exactly.
The other was stationed off the Persian Gulf in Basra, part of the Lend-Lease program of material from the United States to Russia and reverse.
Right. You went from Arkansas to, you talked about the programs, a V1 program that eventually became a V12 program,
correct.
and it had to do with education, how many semesters.
That's correct.
And then talk about sort of how that worked and eventually how that got you to Columbia University.
Well, in November of '42, we all knew we were going to have to do something. 18, we debated in college dorms what to do. I said, I'm going to the Navy. They said, Garland, don't, you can't swim very well. Nor do I want to be in a foxhole in the Army. So I went to Little Rock, Arkansas in November 1942, joined what was called the Navy V1 program.
Right.
The theory here, that word theory, was you would stay in that program till you received your degree, and then you go to Officers Candidate School or Navy midshipman. As the war progressed, they needed officers. They cut that down to the V1 program. Arkansas A&M at Monticello was
Right.
selected as one of those schools.
Yes.
So I put on a uniform along with guys who were in the Marine Corps, including Tom Chandler,
Right.
who was in the Marine Corps, though I didn't know Tom then, our former head baseball coach.
You didn't know you were together until you got here.
Till I got here, that is correct.
Right.
And so after a total of 5 semesters, got 3, got 2, whatever, I was sent to Columbia University in New York City to Navy Midshipman School for a 90-day program to convert me, hopefully, into a naval officer.
Yeah, you talked about how a country boy from McGee, Arkansas, going up to New York City, that was quite a culture shock.
Very much. I'd been to New Orleans once and Little Rock a lot of times. They were then small. So I go from there to New York, like thousands and thousands of people pulled out of the farms, rural areas, and the cities to different environments. And I walked the streets of New York looking at the tall buildings. First time I had liberty, I got lost, went the wrong place, but finally got back to Columbia University.
Right.
And I was commissioned there in early October 1944.
Now, when you left Columbia and came back home on your way to the West Coast to be deployed, did you know at that time where you were going to be assigned, that you were going to be assigned to a transport ship?
No, I already had my orders.
You already had your orders.
And they gave me 10-day leave en route to California, to Long Beach, to pick up my ship. And that ship at that point had made only one trip, and that was to Hawaii.
Right.
They took 400 of various types of personnel there. We loaded in Long Beach a mixed group, OSS, which was the precursor of the CIA, Red Cross personnel, an Army mule pack outfit. We did not have the mules. We took them to Calcutta. They got their mules, and then they had a mule pack train across the Lido Road from India to China. So they were interested. They had trained in Colorado. Interesting people.
That's the one thing about your service and your deployment, was that you met all kinds of people and who you transported. Let's go back. You went home, then you went to San Francisco.
Excuse me, Long Beach that time.
Right,
Correct.
Long Beach.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the vessel. It was named after a General J.H. McCrae, who I looked up and found out that he was a military man of the 1800s. I don't know much more about his history.
I don't know either.
But it was actually called the AP Auxiliary Personnel 149.
Correct.
Talk a little bit about the ship. It was a large ship, obviously, because you were able to bring aboard 3,000 plus a crew of how many?
About 430.
About 430. Talk about the ship. Was it pretty crowded?
Well, it was pretty crowded. As indicated in his earlier remarks, it was built as a transport in the Kaiser shipyards. It was not a conversion. So we were set up. We fed complement our troops 3 meals a day. Many just got 2, but we were so designed that we could turn it out. And we knew how many would go into every compartment.
Right.
And so we loaded these troops. We would stand at the top and count them down. One poor guy in Long Beach at my abandoned ship station came there with his helmet liner. He was seasick every time I saw him. He always had his helmet liner. And those you guys in the Army and the Marine Corps know what a helmet liner is. And it had many uses. One was to catch whatever he had problem with.
Exactly. He was throwing up from California to Calcutta, right?
That's right. We made one stop en route at Melbourne, Australia. It was 40 days and 40 nights to get from California through Melbourne into Calcutta.
I'm going to talk about that trip a little bit more in a minute. But talk about what your job on the ship was. Just a little bit of everything. It wasn't one specific job. You kind of rotate.
A junior officer reporting aboard a vessel then Get a lot of OJT on-the-job training. They take you aboard, and you'll spend 3 or 4 weeks with communication officer, 3 or 4 weeks with the first lieutenant, who's in charge of all the deck, 3 or 4 weeks with the navigation officer, and you made this circular around. However, I did not get that OJ on-the-job training with the engineering officer. I'll come back to that in just a moment. At the same time, you're being trained as an officer of the deck. You would call the JOOD, Junior Officer of the Deck. And that was 3 months training period. At the end of that, you were then said to be an officer of the deck. Now, what that meant is, remember that ship was 417 feet long, 78 feet on the beam, and about 17,000 tons. And so you had this crew of 400 plus, anywhere from 2,800, 3,000 troops, and you're sailing the ocean blue, and you're responsible during that 4 hours you have to watch. And if you have any problem, you call the skipper. His cabin was just behind the bridge.
Right. So that's what you trained to become officer of the day, and when you were officer of the day,
Of the deck.
the skipper might be in taking a nap. You were in charge of the
Whoever, he was
ship.
asleep. Whoever had the watch,
Right.
It was your responsibility. That's sort of heavy for a 20-year-old boy.
I bet it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to talk about that more later. Your first trip from California, you said stopped in Melbourne to Calcutta. It was a little bit unique in that you had an escort. You said you had a tin can, a destroyer, you had a munition ship, an oiler.
Yeah.
But that didn't work out the way you wanted
Well,
it
not
to.
exactly. We always steamed alone except for this.
Right.
The only time we were in a small convoy with an escort. We had this Australian destroyer tin can just ahead of us. We were in the center just behind. Port and starboard was a munition ship and an oiler. So we were steaming along, minding our own business. Next thing was mid-afternoon. We see the destroyer throwing depth charge off the stern. He thought he had a submarine.
How far behind are you? I mean,
Oh, my goodness.
trying to
Maybe
pick-
100 yards,
Okay.
I
Yeah.
guess. I have to think pretty far back.
About
but
100 yards. Yeah. Yeah.
But
That's
it's
a
close
soft,
enough.
That's a soft pitching wedge.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
And so we had to veer to starboard and avoid the munition ship. Nothing happened, but there was a conversation between the two skippers.
I'll bet
They
there
were
was.
supposed to tell us
Right.
before they dropped the depth charges.
So-
Now, had it been a Jap submarine, I would have been happy, or Japanese submarine, what I'm supposed to say now.
You would have liked to have known, so
Yes.
you wouldn't be on top of it.
That's right.
So you had to do a little
If
bit
he
of.
was down, he may have scared him off too.
So after that, y'all decided you'd rather be alone. You can handle this by
Well,
yourself.
we never given the opportunity
Right.
to sail. So we sailed all over the Atlantic, the Indian, the China Sea. Wherever we went, we were always alone, except for that one time.
Exactly.
What you do, you zigzag.
Right,
You
yeah,
have
sure.
you have a path. The starboard 5 degrees on port, whatever it may be.
You talked about the passengers on that first trip, and you started to talk about that OSS, Office of Strategic Service,
yeah.
which is sort of pre-CIA.
Yeah.
Right. And Mule Pack outfit out of Colorado, Red Cross, and others. So
And all
it was really a potpourri of
of
all
every-
kinds of personnel
all
that were
sorts.
fighting the war.
We even had a few whacks.
Right. That was okay.
That was okay.
Yeah.
Well, there's a story there I can't tell you.
Right. Okay.
Not with me, somebody else.
Better not. Out of Calcutta, you talked about how you had elements of the 20th Air Force that you were taking to Tinian Island,
correct.
where they were going to stage for the bombing of Japan.
Correct.
So talk a little bit more about
Well,
that trip.
We came into Calcutta up the Hooghly River, which is a tributary of the Ganges. Largest ship they'd ever seen. Didn't know how to tie us up, but they finally got us tied up, and we offloaded the people that we had there. And there's still an Army lieutenant looking for me, because while there, he bought a suitcase, a cigarette lighter, and something else that I was supposed to send his wife when I got back to the States. I never found the address. So he's probably still fussing at that sailor who took his goods, not deliberately. But in any event, we get into Calcutta, but there about 3 or 4 days, and then that's when we load elements of the 20th Air Force. 3 days, we started getting messages underway from Tokyo Rose, who was part of their psychological warfare.
Right.
Said we would be sunk 3 days out of Calcutta. She knew the name of our skipper, T.R. Cowie, the name of the colonel commanding the elements of the 20th, and where we'd been and where we were going. That makes you anxious, to say the least.
Exactly.
And we were at general quarters, probably 24 to 36 hours.
Right.
But nothing happened, but that was part of it. And she got our attention. It made us anxious.
Right. The
And
psychological
The
warfare.
psychological warfare.
Exactly. So you were expecting any time that
it could
She
happen.
might, yeah, it was a legitimate threat.
That they know who you are and where you've been and where you're going.
That's right. So you had to be ready. And general quarters for over a day, almost
A
48
little over
hours.
24 hours, yeah.
Right. At Tinian, you steamed empty to New Guinea. And talk about that. It was about when you got to New Guinea,
Well,
the people that you
Well,
loaded on
yeah,
at
we
that time.
unloaded. I think there's about 2,700 of these. All these soldiers and nurses had been in New Guinea anywhere, we understood, from 24 to 28, some 36 months. I can't be exact because I'm going on the stories they told us.
Right.
Nearly all were yellow from taking Ativan. Many had jungle rods, that fungal that you pick up. I was only there 3 days. I managed to get on my right foot. Took years to ever get rid of it. But we loaded these folks aboard. Many were in pretty bad shape. We had this one soldier, he would put his head back into bulkhead and look at the other one, and we called it the bulkhead stare. He just sat there and looked at nothing except another steel bulkhead. We had one Army nurse who had apparently having psychological problems. She had jungle rot very badly, could not keep clothes. We had to improvise a padded shell place for her. Then we had one soldier to die. None of us knew how to conduct a barrel at sea, so we broke out the manual. The carpenter made the wooden rack. We sewed him in canvas, put shells and other weights in there. The chaplain said the appropriate words, and we, as you've seen the movies, we dumped him into the sea.
Right.
We didn't want to do that very often.
No.
That was the only time that happened. We did not have the facilities to keep the body.
Exactly. You talked about this was in New Guinea, where they had been actually in New Guinea about 27, 28 months.
It depends on who, you know.
So yeah, something like that. You talked about the burial at sea. Talk a little bit more about the boat itself. Was it? You said that it was a crowded situation. Was it one of the boats where you always had to duck around and or you bump your head a lot of places?
Well, you're always bumping your head. And I had hair.
Ship, excuse me, please.
I'm
sorry.
I've corrected him on that.
I know.
I had hair then. It didn't bother me twice to hit my head. But no, it's for the troops. It's especially crowded, and we gave them freedom to be on topside anytime they wanted to.
Right.
Of course, we always had to alert them. When you're topside at dark, do not strike a match.
Right.
To light your cigarette. You can see a struck match in the butt of that cigarette about 14 to 16 miles. It's where the Earth's curvature is such that it's no longer visible.
Right.
But that's an open signal for anybody who may be out there who might want to take a shot at you. Now, our guys learned pretty quickly. Later, I mentioned the Australian troops.
Right. No, go ahead and do that now.
Well,
you talked about you like the Australians.
Oh, very,
you
very
gained
much.
a lot of respect
Oh,
for
yeah.
them and their country.
No,
and all of that. But sometimes you had to.
Well, we went into Townsville, Australia. This is our second visit to Australia. We loaded again about 2,800, 2,850 Australian troops. And as they came aboard, I was standing at the head of the gangway leading down to a compartment that held 120 soldiers. Soon the word came up, sir, there are no more bunks. I said, I know there are bunks. So I went down. They were throwing the gear on one bunk, got themselves in the other. Said, I'm sorry, guys, you only get one bunk. So we worked that out. But they were very pleasant people. I liked both Melbourne a great deal and Townsville a great deal, and the people we met and interacted with. Now, just before we got into Townsville, we'd pushed our crew to chip and paint the deck. Any sailor knows what that means. You get on your deck, you chip all the loose paint, and you repaint it. We want this ship to look good for our Australian friends. So they come aboard with their hobnail boots. As I understand it, all soldiers in the British Empire wore hobnails. And literally, if you looked upside down, the whole bottom had this little nail head.
Right.
And it was for traction.
Sure.
Great if you need it. But in a couple of days, you could not find any paint on our deck. And our sailors not very, very happy. All their work had gone to naught.
They'd worked hard on that deck. You said that you were.
We took those to Timor, Timor, part of the Dutch East Indies.
I see.
Go ahead.
You said that you never came under attack in those 2
that is
years. Is
correct.
that looking back is that somewhat surprising, considering that you were a troop transport, and you would think from the enemy standpoint that that would be a prime target?
You would think so. You would, especially if Tokyo Rose knew who we were and what we
Right.
were doing.
Right.
But occasionally we had sightings of what appeared to be periscopes, but no one ever bothers. We never shot in anger at anybody, and we're always thankful because, honestly, when you're steaming in enemy waters, whether it's Japanese or German, it worries you because it can always happen. And on our board, we had two 5-inch 38s, which are our main armament. We had 20 millimeters and 40 millimeters anti-aircraft. We practiced a lot, but we never shot at anger.
You eventually went to the Philippines to take troops back to the States before going to Europe via the Panama Canal.
Correct.
Let's get you over to the Atlantic after we look at some photographs.
Okay.
We've got some pictures that you have supplied us, and there is a young Ensign Garland Bayliss, I guess.
Yes.
About how old were you thinking that picture?
20.
20? Great hair.
Great hair, thank
Yeah,
you.
you bet. You bet. There's your ship.
That's the Mighty Mac, the Terror of the Pacific.
There it is, the General J.H. McCrae. Another view, you're one of the people in that
I'm
picture,
one
right?
facing you,
The one facing.
with my hands on my hips. I'm not sure why.
Yeah,
I
probably,
think we're tied up there in Manus Island, M-A-N-U-S.
right.
That is somewhere in the Atlantic.
Now, was that a pose picture? Or were
Certainly
you-
it was posed.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah, or you were just sitting there just
No,
looking out
I just
over
wasn't
the
sitting there
water,
looking
just-
over the water.
He said, yeah, it looks like it could be used for a recruiting poster.
Yes.
I found this, and
I'm glad you did.
And that's a sort of a sketch of the same.
See, if you look at it, the anchor's not there yet.
Right. Right. The U.S. General J.H. McCrae. And now this is at Columbia, right?
Columbia University Midshipman School. And there's the Corps of Midshipmen in parade right there. I want you to see every man there had a hat on. That was 1944.
It was all military. Here's our last picture. Yeah. And like I say, that looks like a picture that could be on a Navy recruiting poster right there. That's a good-looking sailor.
Well, thank you.
Boy, the white teeth and everything. That's
and hair.
And hair. I bet you got some dates from that picture. You hadn't met Mary yet, so
oh,
I
no,
can
no,
say
no,
that,
no,
right?
no. It never hurt.
You were talking about no, I'm sorry, that picture we saw before, was that at Columbia or the Citadel? That was at Columbia.
No.
The
other one was after I left Columbia because I'd already been to the Pacific.
Right.
And I was back home on leave.
Okay.
The one in the sailor outfit was just before I started midshipman school.
The picture of the review that we just looked at.
That was in September 1944 in Columbia University.
At Columbia University. Okay, because we're going to get on later talking about the Citadel after later on. From the Pacific to the Atlantic, through the Panama Canal, and you landed at Le Havre, France, where, again, the same job. You picked up troops, took them back to the States and wherever they needed to go.
We took them back this time to Norfolk.
The Atlantic Ocean was a little bit more of a challenge than the Pacific. You had obviously some challenges in the Pacific as far as the weather and the currents and the waves and the storms and all that, but the Atlantic was particularly mean, right?
Well, one thing, it's a smaller body of water, and the storms can be bad in either. Right. But I think it was on that trip. No, it was when we were going to New York. I guess you're asking about that heavy storm.
Right. Yes, sir.
In a normal steaming, we would do about 424 nautical miles in 24 hours.
About 10 to 12 knots.
Yeah.
Right.
Then this one particular storm in the North Atlantic, as best we could figure, we may have made 11 nautical miles forward. In those seas, all you can do is keep your bow into the sea. That is, where the waves are coming to. If you ever fall off, then that wave hits you broadside, and you're apt to go over.
Right. 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 Almost like rogue waves type of thing.
And I think it was in that one, or the one in the Pacific. We had a sailor standing there to watch our, not a tachometer, it's a device, it's a big thing with an arrow. As it goes to your right, or the starboard, it would get down there, it would shudder and shudder and shudder. Then it'd come back and shudder. And this, if you went beyond a certain point, you kept going. And one of the things we could have done about it, if it happened. Right. But you're sitting there watching it, and especially if you're the OD, the officer of the deck, and if that thing turned on your watch, it's bad scene.
Exactly. You talked about some of the waves were hitting at 140 feet because they
Well,
were coming over the side.
No,
Right.
Tom,
Right.
from the bow, the form was 144 feet tall.
Right.
As we hit in the sea, the waves broke all the way over. I better keep my hands down.
That's okay.
My wife will get me.
You had an assignment to take some elements of the Ninth from Europe back to the Pacific for the staging of the ground war.
Yeah, that
And,
was from Marseille.
Right, but while you were in the Atlantic, you got word that the bomb had been dropped in Japan and that the war was over in Japan, and you were in the right place for that. Talk about that. Yeah.
Well, we unloaded these troops to take them back through the Panama to probably the Philippines. We were unclear on that.
Right.
For staging to invade Japan. The war was over in Japan, and someone in the Pentagon made the decision that all those ships transporting troops that had already passed through the Panama would continue to their destination. Those who had not, us, we were diverted to New York City. And talk about happy people. When we passed the word, that ship rocked not from seas, but from happy soldiers.
That's right.
And I don't blame them.
No.
And they broke out all sorts of stuff you drink. I don't know what it was or where they had it.
Because they all of a sudden, their course just changed to New York City instead of going to get ready
To invade
for a
Japan.
ground war.
That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah, no wonder that they were happy. You were actually on the ship until 1946, really long after the war, because
We kept
there was a
moving.
lot more transporting to be
To
done
bring people back, correct.
to bring people back.
On one of the trips through the Suez, we went both to what is now Pakistan and what is Basra, which you read about a lot in our war in Iraq, up to Persian Gulf to pick up troops. I started talking to the guys. You know Jim Bayliss? Yes. That was my brother, who I'd not seen for over 3 years, and he had left Basra 3 weeks before I got there.
Wow.
Otherwise, I would have had the chance to bring him home, but I did not.
We're running short on
Okay.
time, so you finished in 46, like I say, in the summer of 1946 is when you got off the ship, and you came back, you enrolled in Arkansas at Fayetteville in the fall of 46, started business administration. You, like me, didn't think too much of accounting and taking stat.
Well, they didn't think much of me. We used to call it then run and play with BBA, and both drove me crazy. So I went back to the sciences. I started as a pre-med
Right,
and got my bachelor's in zoology and chemistry.
right. You taught a year in Dermot,
Taught public school, Dermot,
Arkansas.
Arkansas. Then went
Right.
to Orange, Texas.
7th grade.
You know, seventh through 12th.
Yeah, you said that's when you lost your
I
hair.
had 7 different preparations every day.
Right.
And then to Orange, worked for DuPont. That's where Mary and I met. I decided to go to graduate school at the University of Texas in history.
You and Mary.
Big switch.
You and Mary were married in 1950.
Yeah.
You bet. You switched from the sciences, from business administration to the sciences to history, and that took you to the Citadel for 1 year. That was a great experience. Your first son, David, was born there
correct.
at the Citadel, and but you were there for only 1 year, and you had heard about Texas A&M from a professor that you had worked with at the University of Texas,
Yes,
right?
Ralph Steen, who's head of the department at A&M, was a visiting prof at UT.
Right.
Not having him in class, got to know him. He called me once I got to the Citadel, and in 55, the legislature passed a law requiring all graduates of public universities have 6 hours of American history, 6 hours of poli-sci, or government, whatever you want to call it. He called me and said they give me special money to hire 5 people. If you ever think you're coming, it's now. So I did. I regretted leaving after only 1 year at the Citadel,
Right.
but I did not think I could pass up the opportunity.
You talked about how at the Citadel it was all military.
All
you,
military.
You yourself were in uniform
Yes.
as you taught classes there. But then you came to A&M in 1956 and spent 34 years in the history department. We could do a whole another show just on your time at
A&M.
Texas A&M. But that was during a time, I know you knew General Rudder quite well. As fellow military men.
I had his
obviously.
daughter in class.
Right, when you came, Bear Bryant was the head football coach,
Correct.
and so 34 years at Texas A&M and retired in
First time in 86 from
Right.
full-time, 1990.
1990, the second
For
time.
real.
Right.
That 4 years I taught each fall semester during the football season.
Right, it's part-time.
Part-time.
You bet. We're out of time.
So,
Thank you.
well, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Enjoy doing it.
It does. It was fun. Enjoyed it. Garland Bayliss and his wife Mary were married in 1950, and they have 3 sons, David, Fred, and Mark, and 8 grandchildren. He speaks proudly of his opportunity to serve 30 years as a sailor, and we honor him and salute him for that service. I'm Tom Turbeville. Join us next time on Veterans of the Valley.